Hello there, and welcome to the Healing Insight channel. Tonight, we are going somewhere vast and ancient and quietly alive. We are going to the ocean. Not to the shore where waves break and seagulls call and the world feels bright and busy, but deeper than that. Much deeper. We are going to the slow, dark, immeasurable heart of the sea, where water moves in massive rivers that no human eye has ever watched in full, where pressure wraps around everything like a warm and constant embrace, where time unfolds not in minutes or hours, but in centuries and millennia. This is a place the mind has always known, even if the waking self has forgotten. And tonight, we return to it together, very gently, very slowly, following the current all the way down. Your brain is biologically hardwired to sync with the pulse of the deep sea. Just as the massive thermohaline circulation moves with predictable inertia, your subconscious can mirror this rhythm to achieve profound emotional stability. Tonight, we use these ancient aquatic narratives to lower your cortisol and drift into delta waves. Did you know the ocean's slowest currents hold the secret to your deepest rest? By understanding the blue mind effect, we can anchor your psyche in the rhythmic patterns of the abyss. This journey into oceanic psychology provides a blueprint for internal peace, guiding your nervous system into restorative sleep. Imagine your thoughts slowing to the pace of a deep-sea current, moving with a power that cannot be shaken. We are exploring the subconscious parallels between the ocean's great conveyor belt and your own emotional regulation. Let the steady, predictable flow of the underwater world transition your mind into pure tranquility. If you enjoy these gentle journeys, I invite you to like, subscribe, or share a thought below. It helps others find their way here too, one sleepy soul at a time. But for now, all you need to do is relax. Let your body soften, allow your eyes to grow heavy, and let your mind unwind as we explore this fascinating world. Let's begin. There is a concept in psychology so simple it almost feels like something you already knew before anyone told you. Researchers call it the blue mind. It is the name for a quietly altered state of consciousness that human beings tend to slip into when they are near water, or when they imagine themselves near water, or when they simply allow the thought of vast, open water to move through them like a slow tide. The blue mind is not a clinical diagnosis or a complex framework. It is more like a recognition, a naming of something the body has always understood. When you stand beside a lake at dusk, watching the light flatten and the surface grow still, or when you sit on a beach in the early evening, watching the distant horizon lose its sharp edge, or when you simply close your eyes and let the idea of the ocean settle into the space behind your thoughts, something changes in the nervous system. The quality of your attention shifts. The urgency that lives in your muscles begins to ease. Your breath lengthens without any effort on your part. You did not decide to feel calmer. The water did that for you. What makes this fascinating is how deeply rooted the response appears to be. Researchers studying the blue mind effect have found that contact with aquatic environments, even imagined or simulated aquatic environments, even the sound of water playing softly in the background of a room where no water is visible, tends to shift the nervous system toward what is called a parasympathetic state. The parasympathetic nervous system is sometimes described as the rest and digest system, which is the counterpart to the fight or flight response that so many of us live inside without fully realizing it. When the parasympathetic system becomes dominant, the heart rate slows with a gentle, almost inaudible softening of its rhythm. The muscles release some portion of the tension they have been holding all day. Digestion eases into a steadier, more comfortable pattern. The breath drops lower in the body, filling more of the belly and less of the chest. And the mind, that tireless generator of thoughts and concerns and plans and replays of the day's conversations, begins to quiet in a way that feels less like suppression and more like permission. Permission to stop organizing. Permission to stop monitoring. Permission to simply be where you are, as you are, in the gentle company of an imagined and ancient sea. The ocean in particular seems to carry a special quality within this effect. It is not only that water is visually soothing, though it is. It is not only that the sound of waves has a frequency pattern that the brain finds naturally organizing and easy to follow, though that is true as well. It is something older than either of those things. Human beings evolved in a long and intimate relationship with water. Our earliest ancestors lived near it, moved along its edges, and depended on it for survival in the most fundamental and irreducible sense. The first great migrations of human beings followed coastlines and river systems. The first villages clustered near reliable water. The first mythologies in virtually every culture on Earth placed water at the center of creation, at the beginning of all things, at the place where life first arose from something that had not yet decided to be alive. And somewhere in the deep architecture of the human nervous system, all of that long relationship left a mark. When the mind encounters water, or the idea of water, something in the most ancient layers of the brain receives a particular kind of signal. The signal that says, quietly and without words, this is a place of safety. This is a place of life. You can rest here. You have always been able to rest here. Consider how the amygdala responds to environmental cues throughout the course of a day. The amygdala is a small, almond-shaped structure seated deep in the temporal lobe of the brain, and it plays a central role in processing emotional responses, and particularly in detecting threat. It is, in many ways, the nervous system's early warning system, its most ancient guardian. It is always listening, always scanning the environment for signs of danger, always ready to send its alarm signal through the body at the first hint of something that might require a fight or a flight or a very sudden stillness. And it is very, very good at its job. So good, in fact, that in the modern world, where the threats are rarely immediate and physical, but are almost always persistent and psychological, the amygdala can become chronically activated. The body lives in a low-level state of alert that it was not designed to sustain indefinitely. The muscles stay slightly tensed, braced against something they cannot quite identify. The breath stays slightly shallow, not reaching the full depth of the lungs. The mind stays slightly braced, slightly vigilant, slightly unable to fully commit to rest even when the body is lying still. And this sustained, low-grade alert state costs energy. Deep, restorative energy that the body and brain desperately need for healing and integration, and the long, patient work of the night. What the predictable inertia of oceanic movement does when we allow ourselves to truly settle into imagining it is send a very specific message to the amygdala. Not merely a message of absence, not simply the removal of threat, but a message of positive safety. Something deeper and more nourishing than the absence of danger. There is something about the sheer scale and the utter steadiness of deep ocean movement that registers in the nervous system as profoundly, almost overwhelmingly reliable. These currents have been moving in their slow, vast patterns for longer than the human species has existed. They do not hurry. They do not panic. They do not suddenly change course because of something that happened in the world above. They simply move with the kind of patient, inexorable purpose that the amygdala recognizes as deeply, fundamentally, irreversibly safe. And so it begins to stand down. It begins, very slowly and very gently, to release the grip it has been maintaining all day long. And the nervous system, freed from that constant vigilance, begins the long, slow exhale into the rest it has been waiting all day to take. The connection between the steady pace of the sea and the reduction of cortisol in the body is something researchers have been exploring with increasing interest. Cortisol is often described simply as the stress hormone, though that framing understates both its importance and its complexity. Cortisol is essential. It is what wakes the body in the morning and sharpens attention in moments of genuine challenge. It is what keeps the body alert and responsive through the demands of an active day. But when it remains elevated for too long, when the circumstances of daily life keep the body in a state of sustained demand without adequate recovery, cortisol can begin to work against the very systems it is meant to support. Sleep becomes shallower and less restorative. The consolidation of memories becomes less efficient. The immune system labors under a heavier and more constant load. The body aches in small, diffuse, hard-to-name ways that seem to have no specific cause but never quite resolve. And the mind, caught in the cortisol loop, finds itself unable to fully switch off even when everything else in the environment is signaling that the time for rest has arrived. What the blue mind offers is a natural pathway toward cortisol regulation. Not through effort or discipline or the exhausting work of telling oneself to relax, but through something much gentler and much more ancient. Through the quiet surrender of the nervous system to an image it recognizes as safe at a level far below conscious thought. When the mind is given the image of the deep ocean, when it is invited to follow the slow movement of water through vast and dark spaces, when it is allowed to rest inside the idea of something so immense and so patient and so completely unhurried that urgency itself becomes temporarily meaningless, the cortisol system receives a signal to ease. Not a sharp signal, not a commanded signal, but a quiet, gradual, entirely convincing signal that says, in the language of sensation and image rather than words, there is nothing here that requires your alarm. There is no deadline at the bottom of the sea. There is no urgent message waiting in the cold, deep water. There is only movement. Slow, continuous, patient, ancient movement. And the nervous system, recognizing this quality of movement, begins to follow it down. Imagine for a moment that you are not lying still in a room. Let the room soften a little at its edges. Let the walls become less certain, less insistent on their own solidity. Imagine instead that you are suspended somewhere just above the ocean floor. Not in the shallow, lit waters near the surface, where movement and light and the activity of living things create a constant, gentle busyness. But deep down, where the light from above is just the faintest suggestion of blue against what is otherwise total darkness. The water here is cold and still and very, very quiet. Not quiet the way a room becomes quiet when the noise outside stops, but quiet in a deeper, more fundamental way. Quiet the way a place is quiet when it has never been otherwise. When silence is not an absence, but a presence. When the quiet itself is something you can feel pressing gently against you from every direction, supporting you without effort, holding you without condition, asking nothing in return for its ancient and reliable embrace. You do not need to swim here. You do not need to navigate or orient yourself or make any decisions about where you are going. You simply exist inside this vast and ancient medium, and the ocean holds you the way deep sleep holds the dreaming mind. Completely, without condition, without urgency. The only movement is the slow, barely perceptible drift of the current, which moves around you and through your sense of the space, the way a thought moves through a mind that has stopped chasing anything. Quietly, with enormous, unhurried purpose, without beginning or end in any place that you can see from here. Simply movement. Simply the patient, continuous, self-sufficient flow of water through the world's most ancient and most private room. This is the beginning of what we are doing tonight. We are not simply learning about the ocean as a collection of facts to be stored and retrieved. We are using the ocean as a map for the nervous system, a map drawn not in lines and coordinates, but in qualities of movement and depth and darkness and support. A map that leads from the busy surface of waking life down through the twilight layers of deepening calm, and finally into the silent, pressured, perfectly supported darkness of restorative rest. Each thing we explore tonight is another fathom, another depth marker, another gentle, patient, unhurried descent. And the ocean, as always, knows exactly where it is taking you. It has been taking things to their deepest possible rest since long before the first human mind was formed. You can trust it with your night. The thermohaline circulation is one of the most extraordinary phenomena on the surface of this planet, and it is also one of the most invisible. It does not announce itself. It does not move with the drama of a storm or the sparkle of sunlight catching the surface of a wave. It moves in darkness, in cold, in immense slow rivers that take approximately 1,000 years to complete a single circuit of the globe, moving through ocean basins so vast that the term river feels almost comically inadequate. And yet it is the best word we have, because this circulation is indeed a river. The world's largest river. A river that carries more water than all the rivers and streams on land combined, moving it through the deepest and coldest and most pressured spaces that the Earth's water occupies. And it does all of this without drama, without urgency, without any need for the kind of attention and management that the things moving at the surface seem to require. It simply moves. Always. Everywhere. In the dark. Some scientists have called it the ocean's conveyor belt. Others have called it the Great Ocean Circulation or the Global Ocean Thermohaline System. But both names point at the same astonishing and quietly beautiful truth. The ocean is not still. Even in its deepest, darkest, most remote and most inaccessible places, the ocean is always, quietly, continuously, irresistibly moving. And the movement it is making is purposeful, even if the word purpose feels strange when applied to water. The thermohaline circulation has a function. It redistributes heat. It distributes dissolved oxygen. It carries nutrients from the deep to the surface and carries organic material from the surface to the deep. It regulates the global climate in ways that have made the development and continuation of complex life possible. It maintains the chemical balance of the ocean. And it does all of this at a pace so slow that it makes the movement of glaciers seem almost hurried by comparison. The thermohaline circulation works through two of the ocean's most fundamental properties: temperature and salinity. The word thermohaline is itself a compact description of its two driving forces. Thermo for heat, haline for salt. When surface water near the poles of the Earth becomes very cold, cooled by the polar air and by the loss of heat to the atmosphere above, it also becomes very dense. Cold water is denser than warm water, in the same way that cold air is denser than warm air. And when water near the poles becomes very dense, it sinks. Not quickly, not with any drama, not in a great rushing downward cascade that you could hear or see or feel. It descends with the same kind of patient inevitability that characterizes everything in the deep ocean. Slowly, steadily, irresistibly, down through the water column, through layer after layer of slightly warmer and slightly less dense water, each layer giving way without resistance to the denser water descending through it, until the sinking water reaches the ocean floor. And there, at last, it begins its long journey. A deep, cold, dark river that flows along the bottom of the sea, carrying its enormous and invisible cargo of dissolved oxygen and nutrients and thermal memory toward other parts of the globe that it will not reach for centuries. What makes this fascinating from the perspective of the resting mind is the particular quality of that movement. The thermohaline circulation does not pulse the way a heartbeat pulses. It does not speed up and slow down in response to the events of the day, the way the breath speeds up and slows down. It does not have peaks and valleys of velocity that correspond to anything in human experience. It simply flows, with a consistency so profound and so absolute that its rhythm is measured not in seconds or minutes or hours, but in years and decades and centuries. Oceanographers sometimes describe the rate of this deep circulation in terms that the daily human mind finds difficult to hold as a real idea rather than just a number. Water that sinks near Greenland today may not resurface in the Pacific for somewhere between 500 and 1,000 years. The current you are imagining right now, that slow, dark river moving through the floor of the world, began its journey before your great-great-great-grandparents were born. Before the country you live in took its current form. Before many of the historical events that shaped the modern world had yet occurred. And it is still moving, patient and cold and dark, and entirely undisturbed by any of the urgencies that have arisen and resolved themselves in the world above during all those centuries of its slow and patient passage. And here is the remarkable and deeply restful thing about what this quality of movement does to the human nervous system. When the mind is given a genuinely immense timescale to rest inside, when it is offered a perspective so vast that the urgencies of a single day become, within it, almost invisibly small, something unusual and deeply beneficial happens to the quality of attention. The anxieties and urgencies of daily life, which depend for much of their power on the feeling that time is short and that something must be done soon, begin to lose their hold. It is very difficult, genuinely difficult in a neurological sense, to feel truly urgent about the concerns of a single evening when you are contemplating a current that has been moving, unhurried and undisturbed, for longer than recorded human history. The problems that felt pressing an hour ago have not changed. They are still the same size they were. But you have grown somehow. Or rather, your perspective has expanded to include something so much larger than those problems that the problems themselves, seen within this new context, are revealed to be what they actually are. Which is small, temporary, already in motion toward their own resolution. Already being carried by the currents of time in the same way that every concern that has ever felt urgent has eventually been carried through and beyond by the patient movement of the world. The intriguing part is how the brain processes this shift in perspective. When we move from active, goal-directed thinking, from the forward-leaning, planning, problem-solving mode that characterizes the waking day, into what psychologists call a passive observational mode, a mode of watching rather than doing, of attending rather than managing, something measurable and significant happens in the brain. The prefrontal cortex, which is the seat of planning and problem-solving and executive function, and the constant monitoring of whether things are going according to plan, gradually reduces its dominant activity. The networks associated with vigilance and threat detection soften their continuous firing. And the default mode network, which is associated with wandering thought and imagination, and the kind of soft, unfocused, inward-turned awareness that characterizes the threshold between wakefulness and sleep, begins to come gently forward. This transition from the active to the passive, from the effortful to the receptive, from the directed to the wandering, is exactly what the thermohaline current invites. It asks nothing of your problem-solving mind. It presents no puzzle to be solved, no outcome to be achieved, no performance to be evaluated. It simply moves and invites you to watch it move, and in the watching, the effortful part of the mind, finding nothing to do, begins to soften into something quieter and more spacious and more ready for the night. Consider the scale of what you are imagining. The thermohaline circulation moves approximately 17 million cubic meters of water per second through its deepest channels. That number is so large it ceases to function as a number and begins instead to function as a feeling. The feeling of immensity. The feeling of a force so large and so self-sufficient that it simply cannot be resisted or redirected or meaningfully concerned by anything so small as the specific worries of a single human evening. And the nervous system, encountering this feeling, does something very interesting and very useful. It relaxes, not because it has been commanded to relax, not because it has solved all its problems and arrived at a place of genuine certainty about the future, but because it has found something so much larger than those problems that the problems, for the moment, simply step aside. They are still there, but they have been given a more accurate sense of their own scale relative to the scale of what is actually happening in the world right now. And in that more accurate sense of scale, the body finds something it needs very much and rarely gets. Permission to be small. Permission to be held by something larger. Permission tonight to rest inside the ancient and patient immensity of the world's deep water. There is also something deeply and specifically grounding about the permanence of the thermohaline circulation and the deep underwater rivers it creates. Grounding is a word used often in psychology and in contemplative traditions to describe a particular quality of inner stability. Not certainty about the future, which is unavailable. Not the resolution of all problems, which is always temporary, but a felt sense of being solidly located in the present moment, of having something reliable beneath and around you, of the nervous system knowing in its wordless way that the ground is here and that you are right now in this moment and not some imagined future or replayed past safe. The thermohaline circulation offers a version of this grounding that is both unusual and, for many people, surprisingly and immediately powerful. Because these currents have been moving in essentially the same patterns for millions of years. Because they predate not only the human species, but most of the species currently alive on Earth. Because they will continue long after any individual life has completed its course and become part of the permanent record. They carry a quality of permanence that the mind recognizes as something worth trusting. You are not being asked to trust something fragile or uncertain or dependent on circumstances beyond your control. You are not being asked to rely on something that might change or fail or decide without warning that tonight it is going to do something different. You are being invited to rest your awareness inside something so ancient and so reliably present and so completely indifferent to any temporary disruption of the surface world that the word permanent feels almost inadequate to describe it. These currents are not going to stop while you sleep. They have never stopped. Not once in all the millions of years of their existence. They are simply going to continue, moving in their vast, dark, patient way, as they have always moved, as they will always move, as they will be moving in 1,000 years, when the water that is moving through them right now has completed only a fraction of its long, unhurried journey. And the mind, finding this permanence, finding this reliable and ancient and utterly unhurried constancy available to it as a resting place, does what it does when it truly finds something safe and stable enough to trust completely. It lets go. The grip of active thinking loosens, finger by finger, the way a hand loosens its grip when it has been holding something for a very long time and finally, at last, feels sure that it will not fall. The monitoring and scanning that the waking mind does constantly, checking for threats, checking for problems, checking for anything that requires its attention, begins to ease. Because here, in the deep cold water where the thermohaline river flows, there is nothing that requires that kind of vigilance. There is only the current. and the darkness, and the slow, enormous, perfectly reliable passage of water through the deepest places of the world. Moving now as it has always moved. Moving now as it will always move. Patient and cold and dark and entirely, perfectly, reliably there. Let your own weight begin to settle now. Not as an effort, not as a decision you are making. Simply allow the imagined gravity of deep water to take you, the way all heavy things are taken, slowly and inevitably, and without the need for any assistance from the thing that is sinking. Let your shoulders find a lower position than the one they have been in. Let your jaw release from whatever it has been holding. Let your hands open. Let the space between your thoughts widen just slightly, the way water widens and spreads when a stone has been placed into it and sunk to the floor of a still lake, and the widening rings have moved to the edge and faded, and the surface has returned to glass. You are not disappearing. You are simply becoming part of something larger. And in that becoming, there is a rest that is deeper than ordinary tiredness. A rest that the body recognizes as fundamental, as ancient, as the kind of nourishment that only comes from truly, completely, without reservation, letting the ocean hold you. There is a process that happens in the deep ocean that is, when you allow yourself to truly understand it, one of the most quietly beautiful parallels to the human emotional experience that the natural world has to offer. It is the process by which oceanic currents redistribute heat, not by burning it away or suppressing it or deciding that it has no place in a well-ordered system, but simply by moving it. By carrying warmth from the places where it has accumulated in excess to the places where it is needed. By flowing with it patiently through the dark and the cold and the vast distances of the deep ocean. And then, in time, releasing it, gently, gradually, into a new context where it can do a different kind of work and exist in a different kind of balance. The ocean absorbs an extraordinary amount of the sun's energy, far more than the atmosphere or the land surface. The surface waters of the tropics become genuinely, deeply warm, holding thermal energy that the atmosphere would not be able to contain in the same stable way. And if that heat simply stayed where it was, if the tropical ocean simply accumulated more and more warmth without any mechanism for moving that energy elsewhere, the consequences for the entire planetary climate system would be severe and lasting. The tropics would become uninhabitably hot. The poles would become uninhabitably cold. The patterns of precipitation and evaporation that support life on land would be disrupted beyond anything that current ecosystems could adapt to. But the ocean does not hoard its heat. It does not decide that the warmth it has absorbed is its own to keep and to hold. It moves it. The great currents, the thermohaline circulation and the surface gyres and the deep countercurrents that flow in complex patterns beneath them, carry thermal energy from the equator toward the poles, distributing it through the global system in a slow, patient, continuous process of redistribution that has been regulating the planet's temperature for longer than multicellular life has existed in its current forms. The ocean takes warmth from where it is too much and carries it to where it is too little. Not because it decided to be generous, but because this is its nature. This is simply what the ocean does. What makes this a compelling and useful parallel for the psychology of emotional regulation is the method. The ocean does not try to eliminate heat. It does not fight against warmth or judge it, or decide that warmth is inappropriate in a well-ordered oceanic system. It simply picks it up and carries it, gives it somewhere to go, allows it to move through the system rather than staying fixed in one place, building and building and building until the pressure becomes so great that something ruptures. This is exactly what the most effective and most enduring approaches to emotional regulation look like when described in the language of psychology. Not suppression, not the aggressive, exhausting work of deciding not to feel what you are feeling. Not the brittle strategy of building walls around the warmth so that it cannot be felt. But transit, movement, the gentle, patient willingness to let an emotion be felt, to let it be picked up and carried by the current of your awareness, and then to let it continue moving out of the place where it has been held and accumulated through the system toward a more distributed and more manageable resting place. Intense emotions have a physical quality that most people recognize immediately when their attention is drawn to it. They tend to accumulate in specific places in the body, the way heat accumulates in specific regions of the ocean. Tightness in the chest, a locked quality in the jaw that does not fully release even during sleep. A weight behind the eyes that makes them feel tired in a way that sleep alone does not always cure. A constriction in the throat that makes speaking feel difficult even when there is nothing in particular to say. These are places where emotional energy, when it has nowhere to go, settles in and waits. And the more it waits, the more the body braces against it. The more the body braces, the less able it is to release into the deep rest that the nervous system needs. This is one of the central physiological reasons why emotional suppression and deep, restorative sleep do not coexist easily. You cannot simultaneously hold your own inner experience at arm's length and surrender to the vulnerability of deep sleep. The body has to choose. And the body, when it is trying to sleep, is trying to choose rest. It only needs the emotional holding to release enough to let it follow the current down. The ocean's approach to heat distribution suggests a different possibility and a different strategy. What if, instead of bracing against the accumulated warmth of a difficult feeling, the mind were to imagine it as something the current could carry? Not to eliminate it, not to push it away or pretend it is not real or tell yourself that you should not feel it, but simply to allow it to be mobile. To imagine the current of your awareness moving through the place in the body where it is stored, picking it up gently and carefully the way a deep ocean current picks up warmth from a sunlit bank of tropical water and carrying it slowly through the system. Distributing it, diluting its concentration in any single place, allowing it to spread through a larger medium until its intensity, without being denied and without being forced away, naturally and gradually softens into something the body can hold without bracing. Something that is still there, still real, still part of you, but no longer concentrated in the way that demands constant management. This is not a technique that requires effort. And this is important because effort is part of the problem. When we try to manage our emotions through effort, we often find that the effort itself becomes part of the tension. We add the strain of trying to the strain of feeling, and the result is heavier than either alone. What is required for the oceanic approach is something much closer to the ocean's own quality. Patience, space, the willingness to keep moving rather than to stop and struggle. The willingness to let the warmth be carried rather than to insist on holding it or fighting it. The thermohaline circulation does not pause when it encounters a concentration of warm water and deliberate carefully about how to handle it. It simply flows around and through. It takes what is there and carries it with enormous, unhurried, utterly unself-conscious efficiency. And the result, over time and across the vast distances of the global ocean, is balance. Not the absence of warmth, but its distribution. Not the elimination of difference, but its integration into a system large enough and patient enough to hold all of it at once, without being overwhelmed by any of it. The concept of the conveyor belt is one of the most useful images in all of oceanic science, and it translates with surprising precision into a useful image for the relationship between the mind and its own thinking. Imagine the thoughts that are moving through your mind right now, not as problems to be solved or conclusions to be reached or items on a list that you need to get through, but as items on a very long and very slow conveyor belt. They arrive, they move, they pass. Some of them are interesting, and you find yourself wanting to follow them a little way. Some of them are urgent feeling, carrying the weight of something that seemed important earlier in the day. Some of them are familiar, the same thoughts that have come by many times before, returning with the slightly worn quality of things that have been handled often. But all of them are on the belt. All of them are moving. None of them need to be seized and held and examined until they yield their meaning. None of them require you to step off the observation platform and chase them down the belt or push them back to where they came from. They simply need to be watched, gently, without interference, with the same quality of calm and unhurried attention you would bring to watching any slow thing moving at a distance as they pass through your field of awareness and continue on their way. The deep-sea conveyor belt, the thermohaline circulation, is exactly this kind of movement. Things enter it at the surface, where they were warm and light and caught up in the activity of the sunlit world. And then they cool and they sink, and they join the slow river at the bottom. And they travel, sometimes for centuries, but they do not get stuck. There is no place in the deep circulation where water simply accumulates and stops and refuses to continue. The whole system is oriented toward movement, toward transit, toward the perpetual, patient carrying of things from where they are to where they need to be. And the mind that adopts this orientation, even for a few minutes of a particular evening, even just as a light coloring of attention rather than a firmly held practice, tends to find that the thoughts which seemed so insistent begin to loosen. They are still there, but they are moving. And moving thoughts are not threatening thoughts. Moving thoughts are simply the natural traffic of a mind that is beginning to ease. And from that kind of watching, from that quality of patient, unhurried observation, sleep is very, very close. Finding internal stability through the slow-moving, reliable patterns of the global ocean system is not a poetic exercise. It is, in a literal neurological sense, something the brain can use. The brain is a pattern recognition machine. It finds safety in predictability. It relaxes into regularity. When the nervous system encounters a pattern that is both vast enough to feel authoritative and slow enough to be genuinely calming, it does something very specific. It synchronizes. It begins to entrain its own activity to the rhythm of what it is perceiving. This is the same process that makes ocean sounds so reliably sleep-inducing for so many people. The rhythm of waves, arriving in irregular but statistically consistent patterns, gives the brain something to lean into, something to follow, something that is outside the self and therefore outside the reach of the self's anxieties. The thermohaline circulation operates on a timescale so far beyond the human nervous system that it functions as a kind of absolute stillness. It is moving, yes, but so slowly that from the perspective of a human nervous system that thinks in seconds and minutes, it might as well be perfectly still. A current that moves 1 centimeter per second through the deepest ocean is, by human perceptual standards, essentially motionless. And yet it is irresistible. And yet it is carrying, right now, as you listen to these words, an almost incomprehensible volume of water through the deepest places on Earth. Still and moving at the same time. Patient and powerful at the same time. Ancient and entirely present at the same time. This paradox is, for the resting mind, a kind of gift, because it offers an image of rest that is not dead, an image of stillness that is not empty, an image of deep, deep calm that is also, in its own enormous way, profoundly alive. The delta wave is the signature of the deepest sleep. It is the slowest of the brain's electrical rhythms, oscillating at between 1 and 4 cycles per second, rolling through the sleeping cortex in long, slow waves that are nothing at all like the fast, busy oscillations of the waking, thinking brain. And it dominates the electroencephalogram during the most restorative phases of the sleep cycle, the phases that researchers call slow-wave sleep or deep sleep. Deep sleep is when the body repairs itself most actively, when the immune system does some of its most important and most complex work, when the brain consolidates memories from short-term to long-term storage, doing the filing and organizing and cross-referencing that turns the raw experience of the day into something that can be retrieved and used and built upon. When growth hormone is released in its largest nightly pulse, supporting the repair and regeneration of tissues throughout the body. When the deep structural maintenance of the nervous system itself takes place, the clearing of metabolic waste products, the strengthening of synaptic connections that need strengthening, the pruning of connections that have served their purpose. Delta sleep is not just rest. It is renovation. It is the night shift of the body's repair crews, doing quietly essential work that cannot be done while the conscious mind is in charge of the building. What draws the brain toward delta wave activity is, in large part, a reduction in the pace and amplitude of all the other electrical activity that fills the waking brain. The high-frequency beta waves of active, engaged thought must give way. The alpha waves of relaxed wakefulness, pleasant as they are, must also give way. There is a transition through the theta waves of drowsiness, that liminal, hypnagogic state where images arise at the edges of awareness and thoughts lose their linear quality and become more associative, more dreamlike, more like the water than like the solid things that move upon its surface. And from theta, when the conditions are right, the brain descends into the slow, rolling, immensely powerful delta rhythm that carries the sleeping brain through its deepest and most essential renovation. This is a process of slowing down, of oscillating less frequently, of finding a rhythm so slow and so deep that it resembles, in its own way, the rhythm of the thermohaline circulation itself. Both are slow, both are powerful, both are associated with the most fundamental maintenance processes of their respective systems. The ocean doing in water what the brain does in electricity, moving slowly through the dark with enormous, patient, restorative power. The slow-motion narrative of a 1,000-year current journey is, in this sense, an extraordinarily well-matched stimulus for the brain that is trying to find its way toward delta waves. Because to truly follow a current that moves on that timescale, to genuinely allow the mind to track something that takes 1,000 years to complete a single circuit, requires a quality of attention that is exactly, precisely opposite to the alert, high-frequency, rapidly shifting activity of the waking, problem-solving brain. You cannot follow a 1,000-year current with the part of your mind that answers messages or plans tomorrow's schedule or replays conversations that happened earlier today. That part of the mind is too fast, too restless, too oriented toward the near and the specific and the actionable. To follow the thermohaline current, you can only use something much older and much softer. The dreaming part. The part that knows how to move through time in ways that are not linear or purposeful or goal-directed. The part that is, right now, beginning to come gently forward as the more effortful parts of your mind begin to release their hold on the evening. Consider what it would feel like to be part of that current for even a brief portion of its journey. To have been, say, somewhere in the deep South Atlantic for the past 100 years, moving so slowly that the concept of movement barely applies, and the passage of a decade feels like the movement of a breath. The water around you has not changed in any meaningful way during all that time. The temperature has remained consistent, cold in the way that only the deep ocean is cold, a cold that is not harsh or threatening, but simply constant and reliable and entirely stable. The darkness has not changed. There is no day or night here, no variation in the quality of the dark between 1 hour and the next, or 1 year and the next, or 1 century and the next. The pressure has not changed. The silence has not changed. You are simply there, carried along at a pace that makes geological time feel hurried, in a darkness so complete and a silence so total and a support so absolute that the only thing that exists is the gentle, constant, enveloping presence of the water from every direction. And the very, very slow knowledge that somewhere ahead, in centuries that you cannot yet imagine, there is a surface waiting. There is warmth waiting somewhere above. There is light and movement and the return to the world of surfaces and seasons. But for now, there is only this: the dark, the cold, the silence, the slow, irresistible, perfectly supported movement through the deepest part of the world. And the knowledge that this is enough. That this is, in fact, everything. That this dark and this cold and this silence are not lacks but completions. Not absences but presences. Not the absence of the surface but the fullness of the deep. Shifting from the surface-level chaos of daily life to the silent, dark, and peaceful depths of oceanic subconsciousness is a journey that happens in layers. Just as the ocean itself is not simply surface and depth, but an entire gradient of environments arranged by temperature and pressure and light. Arranged in layers that blend into one another with gradual, unhurried transitions. The passage from waking to deep sleep is not a single step, but a layered descent through states that become progressively quieter and darker and more removed from the busy surface world. The sunlit zone is like the bright activity of the waking day. Then the twilight zone, where light is diminishing and the water is cooling, and the activity is slower and more deliberate. Then the midnight zone, beginning around 1,000 meters down, where no sunlight penetrates at all and the darkness is total. And then the abyssal zone, where the pressure is absolute and the silence is complete, and the life that exists there has arranged itself around the deepest possible commitment to patience and darkness and the very long game. Each of these layers corresponds, loosely but usefully, to a phase of the descent into sleep. The sunlit zone is waking life. The twilight zone is the gentle, lowering drowsiness of the early evening, the soft unfocusing of attention that comes when the day's work is done and the body begins its long exhale. The midnight zone is the threshold state, the hypnagogic threshold where the mind is releasing its hold on the particular and specific reality of the day, where images arise and dissolve without the narrative coherence of waking thought. And the abyssal plane, that vast, flat, cold, perfectly stable, perfectly dark environment of the deepest ocean, is the delta zone. The deep sleep. The place where renovation happens. The place where the body does its most important and most fundamental work in the dark, unhurried, completely supported, out of sight of anything that could disturb or demand. And just as the descent through the ocean's layers is not something that requires effort from the water, but simply the natural, inevitable consequence of density and gravity and the irresistible pull of the deep, the descent into sleep, when the nervous system is truly at ease, is not something that requires effort either. It simply happens. When the conditions are right, when the arousal threshold drops and the monitoring systems ease, and the mind finds something slow and ancient and patient enough to follow into the dark, the body simply sinks. The way dense water sinks. The way the thermohaline current descends from the surface near Greenland into the deep Atlantic. Not because it decided to, not because it was trying, but because the conditions were exactly right and the deep was exactly where it needed to go. And the path there was, as it has always been, simply down. The subconscious mind has been described through water metaphors across cultures and centuries, and this is not an accident or a coincidence, but a recognition. The surface of a body of water is what we can see, what we can interact with directly, what responds to the weather and the wind and the particular events of the day. But beneath that surface, accessible only through descent, through the willingness to go down rather than to remain on top, is something far vaster, far older, far less responsive to the momentary conditions of the world above. The unconscious mind, the deeper layers of memory and meaning and biological regulation and ancient pattern that underlie and support conscious experience, is very like the deep ocean in this way. Mostly invisible from the surface, but always present, always active in its slow, deep, essential way, always carrying out the work that the surface cannot do and would not know how to do if it tried. When we allow the image of the deep ocean to settle into the mind, when we follow the thermohaline current into its slow, dark, pressured, ancient journey, we are communicating with this deeper part of ourselves in a language it recognizes. Not in words, which are surface things. Not in plans or analyses, which are surface activities. But in the older language of image and sensation and felt quality. The language of the body as much as the language of the mind. And the message we are sending in this deep and ancient language is one of permission. Permission to go down. Permission to release the surface. Permission to do the deep work of the night in the dark, without monitoring, without management, without any need to report back to the surface until the work is done and the deep is ready to give you back, refreshed and repaired, and carrying something essential that you did not have when you went down. Allow your thoughts to become less specific now, if they have not already begun to do so. Let them soften from the particular to the general. Instead of this thought or that thought, with its specific content and its particular weight, imagine instead a quality of mental movement. Something that is moving but not rushing. Something that has direction but no urgency. Something that is, in every meaningful sense, flowing. You might imagine this as a color. Deep blue shifting toward a blue so dark it is almost indistinguishable from black. The color of water that has not seen light in a very long time. Or as a temperature. The steady, consistent, perfectly stable cold of water that has not seen sunlight for 100 years and has no expectation of seeing it for 100 more, and is entirely at peace with this. Or simply as a feeling. The feeling of being carried without effort. Of having no decisions to make and no choices to consider. Of being part of something so much larger than any individual concern that the concerns themselves become, for this moment, not absent, but simply very, very quiet. Like voices heard from a very great distance. Present, but entirely unable to reach you down here in the deep. The ocean does not need you to do anything. The thermohaline circulation does not require your participation or your guidance or your approval or your attention. It has been moving for millions of years without any input from the human mind, and it will continue moving long after any particular evening's concerns have resolved themselves into the irrelevance that time eventually makes of everything. This is not a diminishment of you or your experience or the genuine importance of the things that matter to you. It is an invitation into proportion, into the kind of perspective that only true immensity can offer. You are very small and the ocean is very large, and right now, tonight, that is the most restful thing in the world. Because smallness, in the presence of something benevolent and enormous and completely capable of handling itself, is not vulnerability. It is rest. It is the freedom from having to be large enough to contain everything. The ocean is large enough. The current is strong enough. All you need to do right now is let it carry you. There is a particular psychological benefit that comes from finding yourself in imagination as a small and supported part of a massive, ancient, life-sustaining system. It is a benefit that is difficult to name precisely, but very easy to recognize once it is felt. It is the opposite of the feeling that everything depends on you. The opposite of the feeling that if you release your grip on the management of your own experience, things will fall apart. It is the feeling of being held by something that does not depend on your effort for its continuation. Something that will keep going whether you are actively managing it or not. Something ancient and enormous and entirely indifferent in the most comforting possible sense to whether you are asleep or awake right now. Something that held the world long before you arrived and will hold it long after you has become part of the permanent record. The thermohaline circulation carries more water than all the world's rivers combined. It moves through every ocean basin on Earth. It distributes heat and nutrients and dissolved gases through the global system in a process so fundamental that the stability of the climate depends upon it. Billions of organisms shape their lives around the patterns it creates. And it does all of this without anyone managing it, without anyone monitoring it or optimizing it or making decisions about where it should go next. It simply follows the laws that govern its nature. Temperature and density and gravity and the geometry of the ocean basins. And those laws, being the fundamental laws of physics that have governed matter since the beginning of the universe, are reliable in a way that nothing in human experience can quite match. They will not change tonight. They have not changed in all of human history. They will not change while you sleep. When the mind is given this image, this vision of a vast and self-sustaining and ancient system that requires no management and provides complete and reliable support for everything within it, it responds in a way that is both neurological and deeply human. The controlling function relaxes. The part of the mind that is always checking to see if things are still okay, still on track, still moving in the right direction, finds that here, in the deep ocean, there is no checking required. Things are more than okay. They are simply, permanently, irrevocably in process. Being carried, as they have always been carried, by forces so much larger than any individual element, that the idea of a single molecule of water worrying about whether the circulation is going to continue is not only unnecessary, but genuinely, completely, impossibly unnecessary. And the human mind, resting in the image of this impossibility, finds its own version of it. The impossibility for this moment of genuine urgency. Because you are in the deep current now. And the deep current does not alarm. It does not urgency. It simply flows. There is a quality of silence in the deep ocean that has no equivalent anywhere in the human world. Not the silence of an empty room, which still carries the ambient hum of electrical systems and the distant sounds of a living building. Not the silence of a forest at night, which breathes with insect song and the movements of nocturnal animals. The silence of the deep ocean is different in kind, not merely in degree. It is a silence that has never been otherwise. A silence that existed before the first sound was ever made on the surface of this planet. A silence that is not the absence of noise, but the presence of something so enormous and so fundamental that noise has simply never had occasion to arise there. This is the silence the resting brain is moving toward right now. Not the effortful silence of someone trying to quiet their thoughts, but the deep, ancient, structural silence of a place where everything that needs to happen happens in the slow language of movement and temperature and pressure, without any need for the kind of vibration that makes sound. The brain that is drifting toward sleep is a brain in search of this silence. It is moving away from the world of sound and language and rapid information processing toward something much older and much quieter. The visual cortex, which processes the constant stream of visual information during waking, begins to reduce its activity. The auditory cortex, which has been monitoring the sonic environment of the day, begins to soften its vigilance. The language areas, which generate the internal monologue that most of us experience as the constant companion of waking consciousness, begin to quiet their production. And what is left, as these systems ease back from their daytime activity, is something that resembles the deep ocean in its most fundamental quality. Silent, dark, enormously patient, perfectly supported. Follow this quieting now, not as a decision, but as a surrender. The way the surface of a lake quiets when the wind stops, not because anything is forcing it to be still, but because stillness is the water's natural state when there is nothing to disturb it. Your natural state, right now, with the day done and the body horizontal and the darkness of the evening all around you, is very close to sleep. Very close to the silence of the deep. The thoughts that are still arising are less like the waves of the surface and more like the long, slow oscillations of deep water. They take longer to form, and they move more slowly, and they carry less energy. This is good. This is exactly right. This is the thermohaline current of your own consciousness beginning to descend. The abyssal plane covers more of the Earth's surface than any other single landscape type. More than deserts, more than forests, more than tundra or grassland or anything the land has to offer. It is the most extensive environment on our planet, and it is one of the least known. Vast, flat, cold, dark, and extraordinarily stable. The creatures that live there have adapted to conditions that have barely changed in millions of years. They are the specialists of permanence, the architects of patience. Life on the abyssal plane does not hurry. It cannot afford to. In conditions where food is scarce and energy is precious, the most successful strategy is to move as little as possible. To wait, to conserve, to be in the most complete sense still. And in this stillness, to thrive in ways that the busy surface world would find difficult to imagine. This is not a sad existence. It is not deprivation. It is, from within its own logic, a kind of perfection. The deep-sea creatures that have evolved in these conditions are masterworks of biological efficiency. Their metabolic rates are reduced to the lowest levels compatible with life. Their nervous systems are oriented not toward the rapid processing of constantly changing stimuli, but toward the patient waiting and the slow response. They are the closest thing to biological meditation that the living world has produced. And they have been doing it successfully for hundreds of millions of years. There are fish in the deep sea that may live for 200 years. There are organisms on the ocean floor that are essentially unchanged from their ancestors of millions of years ago. The deep ocean rewards patience in a way that the surface cannot, because the surface is too changeable, too variable, too demanding of rapid adaptation. The deep simply is. And in simply being, it has perfected the art of endurance. The body that is resting well is doing something that rhymes with this. It is reducing its metabolic rate to the lowest levels compatible with life and health. It is slowing the production and processing of stimuli. It is orienting its most fundamental biological systems not toward engagement with the world, but toward the patient, internal, essential work of maintenance and repair. And it does this best in conditions that resemble, in the important ways, the conditions of the abyssal plane. Stable, dark, quiet, cool, free from disturbance, free from the need to respond rapidly to anything. Given the gift, for these few hours, of being left alone to do the work that only the resting body knows how to do. The warmth of the surface, all the brightness and activity and engagement of the day is far above you now. Not gone, not lost, but distant as the sunlit zone of the ocean from the abyssal plane. Present somewhere, certainly, but utterly irrelevant to what is happening here in the deep and the dark and the quiet, where the real work of the night is beginning. You are in the abyssal zone of your own sleep now, or you are approaching it. You are in the gradient, descending, and each breath takes you a little deeper. Each exhale releases a little more of the surface. Each moment of simply allowing the current to carry you is another fathom, another depth marker, another quiet confirmation that the deep is close, and that the deep is safe, and that the deep is exactly where you need to be right now. Your breath is slower now than it was at the beginning of this journey. If you are not sure of that, you can simply notice, without changing anything, without reaching for anything. The breath is usually doing something quietly generous when we are not managing it. It is moving at the pace that the body needs, rather than the pace that the day imposed. And right now, the pace that the body needs is something approaching the pace of deep water. Long and slow and full, with a quality of completeness to each exhale that feels like setting something down. Like placing, very gently, the weight of the day on the surface of a calm sea and watching it drift away. Not disappeared, not denied, simply no longer in your hands, floating somewhere above you on the surface of a sea that stretches in every direction to a horizon you cannot see. And you are here below all of it, in the quiet, in the dark, in the current. The integration of everything we have explored tonight comes together now into a single, unified experience. Not a collection of facts to be remembered or a set of ideas to be evaluated and stored, but an experience, a felt sense of being held, of being in the right place, of being right now and entirely carried. The blue mind has given the nervous system permission to rest. The thermohaline circulation has given the mind a rhythm slow enough to follow into sleep. The emotional regulation model of the ocean has given the body a way to release the accumulated warmth of the day's feelings without suppression and without struggle. The deep wave narrative has given the brain a pathway into its own deepest renovation. And the final, simple, complete image of total immersion in something ancient and enormous and entirely capable of sustaining itself has given the self, the tired, effortful, hard-working self, permission to be small for a while. Permission to be held. Permission, for this night at least, to belong to something larger than itself and to rest there completely without reservation, without any remaining need for management or vigilance or the performance of being awake. Imagine the ocean floor now. Not dramatic or jagged, but the abyssal plane in its truest form. Flat, consistent, covered in a soft, deep sediment that has been accumulating for millions of years, each layer the compressed record of a season, a year, a century. The sediment is made of the shells of tiny organisms that lived at the surface, and when their lives were done, sank slowly through all those miles of water to come to rest here in the quiet, adding their particular substance to the ongoing accumulation, becoming part of the record, part of the history that the deep sea keeps in its slow, patient, layer-by-layer way. Your own body is doing something like this right now. The experiences of the day, the information and the emotions and the sensations that have accumulated through the waking hours are being processed and sorted and consolidated. The hippocampus does much of its most important consolidation work during sleep, particularly during the deep, slow-wave sleep that is the neurological equivalent of the abyssal plane. It replays the events of the day in compressed form, identifying what matters and transferring it to long-term storage, allowing the trivial to fade in the way that the insubstantial parts of surface organisms dissolve during their long descent through the water column before they reach the floor. Only the essential survives the descent. Only the substantive makes it all the way to the permanent record. This is, in the deepest sense, what sleep is for. Not merely for the body's physical repair, though that is essential, but for the making of meaning, for the slow, deep, unconscious work of integrating experience into understanding, of taking the raw material of the day and doing with it what the deep ocean does with the slow rain of material from above. Receiving it, sorting it, preserving the essential, and gently releasing the rest. And the quality of this work depends entirely on the depth of the sleep in which it happens. The deeper the sleep, the more complete the processing. And the most reliable pathway to deep sleep, as the ocean has been quietly demonstrating for billions of years, is this: go down slowly. Follow the current. Trust the dark. Let the pressure hold you. And do not, under any circumstances, try to manage the descent. The thermohaline current is moving right now. This very moment, as you listen and as your breath slows, and as the day loosens its grip on your body, there is cold, dense water sinking near the poles of the earth. There is deep, ancient water flowing along the ocean floor through the dark. There is warm surface water beginning its long journey toward a colder place, where it will eventually become dense enough to sink and join the deep current. All of this is happening right now, simultaneously, on every ocean basin of the planet. An enormous, simultaneous, perfectly integrated, completely self-sufficient movement of water through a system that needs nothing from you except, perhaps, your occasional presence as a witness. And you are here, right now, a small and perfectly supported witness to the most ancient and most patient process on the surface of the earth. And in that witness, in that small, quiet, unhurried, deeply restful act of simply being here while the ocean does its work, the last of the waking self releases its grip. And the deep takes you, closing the loop on emotional regulation, finding a permanent resting place of calm through the ocean's eternal, quiet momentum, is not something that happens all at once. But something begins tonight. Something shifts when the nervous system is given, even once, the experience of genuinely resting inside an image of reliable immensity. The nervous system learns from experience. It updates its models of what is safe and what is available. And when it has the experience, even once, of the profound rest that comes from allowing the ocean's patience to become, for a few moments, the mind's own patience, it carries something of that forward. A new reference point. A new sense of what rest actually feels like when it is not effortful. When it is not sleep chased and caught, but sleep arrived at, the way a molecule of dense water arrives at the ocean floor. Simply by following its nature. The emotional regulation that the ocean models is, in its deepest sense, a model not of control, but of flow. The ocean does not control its currents. It simply follows the laws that govern its nature. Temperature and density and gravity and the shape of the basin. And the result of this faithful following of its own deepest nature is a system of extraordinary balance and stability. Not perfect stasis, not the absence of change, but the kind of dynamic stability that moves and adapts and distributes and redistributes and yet maintains, over the long timescales that matter, a remarkable and life-sustaining equilibrium. You have your own version of these laws, your own deep nature, the patterns of breath and heartbeat and sleep and waking that your body follows not because you manage them, but because they are woven into the fundamental architecture of what you are. And the emotions that move through you are part of a system that knows how to handle them, knows how to move them through, knows how to distribute and release and integrate. You do not need to manage this process tonight. You only need to stop interfering with it. And the ocean, in its vast and patient way, will show you how. Let the image of the deep current carry you now, not as a metaphor, not as an idea to be held and examined, but as an experience, a felt sense of movement without effort, of direction without urgency, of being right now in the deepest and most supported place you have ever been, moving with the ancient, patient, irresistible momentum of the world's most fundamental circulation. The cold is not uncomfortable here. It is consistent. The darkness is not empty. It is full of the quiet, slow activity of the most important maintenance work in the world. And the pressure, the enormous, enveloping, total pressure of all that water above and around you, is not weight. It is embrace. Complete. Unconditional. Ancient beyond any individual memory. Present beyond any individual concern. The water holds you. The current carries you. The darkness wraps around you like a thing that has been waiting for you for a very long time. And the only thing you need to know, the only thing that matters in this moment, is that you are exactly where you are supposed to be. Moving exactly as slowly as you are supposed to move. Resting exactly as completely as you are supposed to rest. You are a molecule in the great circulation, small and held and essential, moving through the deepest part of the world on a journey that does not require your management or your vigilance or your effort. Only your presence, only your willingness tonight to let the current be in charge. There is something that happens to the sense of time when the mind truly follows the ocean's pace. It is not that time disappears. It is that time changes its quality. In the waking world, time has urgency. It moves in the direction of things that need to be done, things that have not yet happened but must happen soon, deadlines and appointments, and the general forward pressure of a life being lived at the surface. But in the deep ocean, time has no such quality. The thermohaline current does not experience time as moving toward anything in particular. It simply experiences movement. It simply experiences the ongoing, patient, completely unhurried transit through the dark. And when the mind is following the thermohaline current, when it has truly let go of the surface time quality and allowed itself to slip into the deep time quality, something very unusual and very restful happens. The future stops pulling. The past stops pressing. And there is only the present, expanded and soft and as wide as the abyssal plain, containing nothing that requires urgency and offering nothing but the gentle, continuous, perfectly reliable now. This shift from surface time to deep time is one of the most consistent features of the approach to sleep, and one of the most sought after. Most people, when they are having difficulty sleeping, are trapped in surface time. They are thinking about tomorrow. They are reviewing yesterday. They are anywhere except the present moment of their body lying in the dark. And the paradox is that the present moment, the actual physical present moment of a body at rest in the dark, is one of the most comfortable places imaginable. There is no threat here. There is warmth and support and the absence of demand. But the surface time mind cannot stay there long enough to benefit from it. It keeps being pulled back up to the surface, back to the bright, busy world of what has been and what might be. The deep time quality of the thermohaline current is an invitation to let that pulling stop, to let the surface recede, to stay here in the present, in the dark, in the supported and patient now. Breathe into that now. Not a forced breath, not a designed breath, simply the next breath that your body takes of its own accord, which is already slower than the one before it, and which requires nothing from you except the simple willingness to let it happen. Let it happen. Let the breath move in the deep, unhurried way that it wants to move when the day is done, and the body is horizontal, and the mind has found something large enough and old enough and patient enough to rest against. The breath knows the way to deep sleep. It has been making this journey every night of your life. You do not need to guide it. You only need to stop blocking it. And the ocean, the deep and patient and ancient ocean that is moving through the dark right now with all of its enormous, unhurried purpose, is showing you exactly how. The global ocean covers approximately 71% of the Earth's surface. That means that when you imagine the world from above, from the perspective of a satellite looking down at this blue and white sphere turning slowly in the dark of space, you are looking mostly at water, mostly at ocean, mostly at the vast, reflective, endlessly varied surface of a system so large that the continents, as significant as they seem from within them, are more like islands in a global sea than like the dominant feature of the world. The ocean is the dominant feature. The ocean is the world more than anything else. And the ocean is, right now, moving. All of it, everywhere, in its slow, patient, layered, self-sustaining way. The surface currents carrying warm water in vast gyres that spin slowly around the ocean basins. The deep currents carrying cold water along the ocean floor in the slow, dark river of the thermohaline circulation. The upwellings where deep cold water rises to the surface, carrying nutrients that support vast communities of life. The downwellings where surface water cools and sinks, beginning the long journey that will carry it through the deepest places of the world. This entire system, this vast, layered, self-sustaining, planet-covering movement of water through the world is happening right now. And it asks nothing of you. It has been happening since long before you existed, and it will continue happening long after any individual human concern has been resolved and forgotten and returned to the general circulation of things. This is not meant to diminish your concerns. Your concerns are real and they matter, and they will be there in the morning, smaller and more manageable than they seem tonight, as concerns always are after the deep has done its work. But right now, right here, in the dark and the quiet and the supported stillness of this particular moment, the ocean is in charge. And the ocean, as it has always been, is doing just fine. Consider the depth of the Mariana Trench. Nearly 11 kilometers below the surface of the Pacific Ocean, in the deepest point of the global ocean, there is a place called the Challenger Deep. At the bottom of the Challenger Deep, the pressure is approximately 1,000 times greater than the pressure at sea level. The temperature is just above freezing. The darkness is total and absolute. And yet, even there, even at the most extreme environment on the surface of the planet, there is life. Bacteria living in the sediment. Small crustaceans adapted to pressures that would instantly and completely destroy any unprotected surface creature. Life, in its extraordinary persistence and adaptability, has found a way even in the most extreme expression of the deep. What makes this intriguing from the perspective of the resting mind is what it suggests about resilience, about the capacity of living things to find equilibrium even in conditions of extraordinary pressure and complete darkness. The organisms that live at the bottom of the Challenger Deep are not struggling against their environment. They are not fighting the pressure or straining against the cold or attempting to generate light in the darkness. They have adapted. They have found their equilibrium with the conditions they exist in. They are, in the truest sense, at home in the dark and the cold and the pressure. Because adaptation is not compromise. Adaptation is the finding of a relationship with one's environment that is not adversarial but integrative. Not fighting against the conditions, but discovering how to thrive within them. The sleeping body is doing something like this. It is finding its equilibrium with the conditions of the night, with the dark and the stillness and the cooling temperature of the room, with the reduced demands of the sleeping world, so different from the demands of the waking one. The body adapts to these conditions with the same effortless competence that the deep-sea creature adapts to its extreme environment. It slows the metabolism. It lowers the core temperature slightly. It reduces the activity of the conscious systems and redirects that energy toward the maintenance and repair of the unconscious ones. It finds every night the particular equilibrium that is sleep. And it does this not because of anything you do, but because of what you are. Because this capacity for rest, this ability to find equilibrium with the conditions of the night, is written into the deepest level of your biology. It is as ancient as the ocean itself, as reliable as the thermohaline circulation, as patient and as persistent, and as entirely trustworthy as the deep. Trust it now, not as an act of will, simply as a recognition. The body knows how to sleep. It has been sleeping every night of your life, in circumstances that were sometimes much less comfortable and much less quiet than this one. It knows the way. It is already on the way. What it needs from you right now is simply the willingness to stop standing in the door, to step back from the threshold, to allow the descent to happen the way all descents happen in the ocean, by simply letting go of whatever was holding you at the surface and allowing the density of your own deep nature to carry you down. The bioluminescent creatures of the midnight zone are one of the ocean's most quietly astonishing stories. In the dark layers of the ocean, where no sunlight penetrates and the world has been permanently, absolutely dark for billions of years, life has found a way to make its own light. Bacteria that glow with a steady, faint blue-green. Fish with organs called photophores that produce cold light along their flanks and undersides. Jellyfish that pulse with slow waves of bioluminescence as they drift through the dark. Deep-sea squid that communicate in patterns of light too subtle for human technology to fully decode. All of this living light in the permanent dark of the midnight zone, produced not by burning but by chemistry, by the patient biological transformation of one molecule into another, releasing energy in the form of light rather than heat. What makes this compelling for the resting mind is the image of light in darkness that is not intrusive or demanding. Bioluminescent light is not the light of the surface. It does not wake things up. It does not signal danger or demand response. It is simply there, in the dark, producing its gentle glow for purposes that are quiet and local and not addressed to you at all. A fish using its light to disguise its silhouette against the faint brightness above. A bacterium producing light as a byproduct of chemistry. A deep-sea creature using a lure of light to attract the rare prey that drifts past in the dark. All of this quiet luminosity in the permanent night of the deep is an image of activity that does not disturb, of life continuing in its slow and patient way entirely in the dark, without alarm, without urgency, without any need for the surface light that we associate with waking and with the demands of the day. Your own mind, as it descends towards sleep, is not becoming empty. It is becoming bioluminescent. The conscious, surface light of waking thought is fading, yes. The bright, demanding, directed light of daytime attention is going out. But something else, something quieter and slower and older, is beginning to glow. The dreaming mind, which works in images and associations, and the particular logic of symbols rather than the sequential logic of waking thought, is beginning to light up in its own way, with its own chemistry, producing illumination that is not for the waking world, but for the deep, for the work of integration and consolidation, and the strange, patient creativity of the sleeping brain. You are not going dark. You are going bioluminescent. And the light that will carry you through the night is already beginning to form, somewhere in the deepest and most private layers of your mind. The concept of neutral buoyancy is one that deep-sea divers and submarines use to describe a state of perfect equilibrium between the density of the vehicle and the density of the water around it. When neutral buoyancy is achieved, the vehicle neither rises nor sinks. It simply rests in place, held at a particular depth by the perfect balance of its own weight and the water's support. It can move forward or backward or sideways with minimal effort, but it has no tendency in any direction unless a force is applied. It simply is, at its depth, perfectly balanced, perfectly suspended, perfectly at rest in the medium that surrounds it on all sides. This is the feeling that the deepest meditation and the deepest sleep have in common. The feeling of neutral buoyancy, of being held at your depth by the perfect balance of your own density and the density of whatever surrounds and supports you. Not rising toward waking, not sinking into unconsciousness, simply resting, suspended, in perfect equilibrium with the conditions of the moment, available to move if movement is needed, but requiring no movement. Perfectly still, perfectly supported, perfectly, deeply, entirely at rest. Your body is approaching this state right now, or it is already there. The distinction may be impossible to determine from the inside, and that impossibility is itself a sign of how close you are. Because the mind that can no longer tell whether it is approaching rest or already in, it is a mind that has released most of its monitoring function. A mind that has let go of the anxious checking that keeps most of us from descending as far as we need to go. A mind that is, in its own way, achieving neutral buoyancy. Simply here, simply resting, simply part of the deep, unhurried, perfectly supported medium of this particular night. The ocean's greatest rivers are invisible. Not only the thermohaline circulation, but the surface currents too. The Gulf Stream carrying warm water up the eastern coast of North America and across the Atlantic toward Europe. The Kuroshio Current performing a similar service in the Pacific. The Antarctic Circumpolar Current flowing in a great ring around the bottom of the world, unimpeded by any landmass. The most powerful current on Earth in terms of the volume of water it carries. All of these are invisible from the air. From a satellite, the ocean looks like a surface, like a largely undifferentiated expanse of blue and gray. You would not know from that height that beneath that surface, rivers are moving. Enormous, ancient, self-sustaining rivers that carry more water than anything on land could contain and move it with a patience that land rivers, always hurrying toward the sea, do not have. This quality of invisible power is one that the resting body has as well. The most important things that are happening in you right now are not visible. They are not announced. They do not require your attention or your management. The immune system is doing its quiet, complex, essential work. The glymphatic system, which is the brain's own waste-clearing system and which operates primarily during sleep, is moving cerebrospinal fluid through the spaces between the brain's cells, washing away the metabolic byproducts of a day of thinking. The endocrine system is releasing its carefully orchestrated sequence of hormones, each one signaling a different phase of the night's work. Growth hormone, prolactin, the gradual rise of cortisol that will reach its peak near dawn and prepare the body to return to the surface. All of this invisible, essential, self-sustaining work is happening right now in you while you rest. You do not need to do anything for it. You do not need to understand it or manage it or even know that it is happening. It is the thermohaline circulation of your own body, ancient and reliable and entirely self-sufficient, moving through the dark, doing its work, asking nothing of you but the gift of your rest. The Coriolis effect is the force that gives ocean currents their characteristic curves and spirals. It is not a force in the usual sense, but an apparent deflection, the result of the Earth's rotation beneath the moving water. Because the Earth is rotating, water moving in a straight line appears to curve. In the northern hemisphere, it curves to the right. In the southern hemisphere, it curves to the left. And the result of this consistent, gentle, planet-wide deflection is the great gyres of the ocean, the enormous circular currents that span entire ocean basins, slowly rotating, carrying warm water from the equator toward the poles along their western edges and cold water from the poles back toward the equator along their eastern edges. The North Atlantic Gyre, the South Atlantic Gyre, the North Pacific Gyre, the South Pacific Gyre, the Indian Ocean Gyre, each one a slow, enormous, self-contained circulation, turning with the planet, patient as the Earth itself. Consider what it would mean to be carried by a gyre. Not the thermohaline deep current, but the surface gyre, turning slowly in the sunlit zone. To be a piece of driftwood, perhaps, or a patch of sea foam, riding the great circular current around the periphery of an entire ocean basin. The journey would take years, decades even. You would pass through the tropics, where the water is warm and the blue is deep and the sun is intense overhead. You would drift along the eastern edges of the great continents, where upwelling water brings cold nutrients to the surface and the sea fills with life. You would move through the subtropics, where the water is clear and the center of the gyre is calm, almost still, a place of warmth and clarity and the particular silence of deep, clear water in a place far from any land. And then you would complete the circuit, arriving back at where you began, having traveled thousands of miles in a great slow circle, unchanged in any essential way, still exactly yourself, but having passed through an enormous amount of world in a way that required nothing of you except the willingness to be carried. This is the journey of a night of good sleep. Not a linear journey from point to point, from tired to rested, though it is that too, but a circular journey, a great slow circuit through the different zones of the sleeping brain, through the light sleep of the early night, where the mind is still releasing the surface and beginning its sorting work, through the delta sleep of the midnight hours, where the deepest renovation happens, through the dreaming sleep of the later night, where the images arise and the associations form, and the mind does its strange, essential, creative integration. And then back, gradually and gently, to the waking surface. But not the same waking surface you left. A refreshed one, a renewed one that has been, in its way, changed by the journey, made more capable and more resilient and more ready for whatever the new day will bring. Your breath is very slow now, very soft, moving in and out with a quality that is barely distinguishable from stillness. This is good. This is the breath of someone who is very close to sleep, very close to the deep, very close to the place where the waking self steps back and the sleeping self takes over, and the body does the ancient, essential, perfectly reliable work of the night. You do not need to cross any threshold. You do not need to do anything to arrive. You simply need to stay here in this breath and let the next one be a little slower, and let the one after that be a little slower still, until the breath and the current are the same thing, and the night and the deep are the same thing, and the you that was lying here thinking about sleep and the you that is simply, quietly, completely asleep are the same thing too. The deep-sea hydrothermal vents are one of the ocean's most extraordinary and most quietly beautiful systems. In certain places along the mid-ocean ridges, where the great tectonic plates of the Earth's crust are slowly pulling apart, seawater seeps down through cracks in the ocean floor, is heated by the magma below, and emerges in great plumes of superheated mineral-rich water that can reach temperatures of 400 degrees Celsius. And around these vents, in the permanent dark of the deep ocean, communities of life have arisen that are entirely independent of sunlight. They do not depend on photosynthesis. They depend on chemosynthesis, on the energy locked in the chemical compounds of the vent water, converted by bacteria into the base of a food web that supports tube worms and crabs and shrimp and fish in a world that has never seen the sun and never needed to. This is one of the most important biological discoveries of the 20th century. The discovery that life does not require sunlight, that the conditions for life can be met in complete darkness at the bottom of the sea, far from anything that the surface world would recognize as hospitable, that the energy for life can come from within the earth rather than from the sky above. And what this reveals, in its quiet and extraordinary way, is something about the nature of resilience and self-sufficiency, about the capacity of living systems to find their energy wherever it exists, regardless of whether that energy looks the way we expect energy to look, about the deep, patient, creative persistence of life in conditions that seem, from the outside, to offer nothing at all. Your sleeping body is something like this. It will find its energy in the dark. It will do its essential work far from the surface demands that characterize the waking day. It will sustain itself, maintain itself, and restore itself using resources that are entirely internal, drawn from the deep layers of biological process rather than from the external world of light and demand and performance. And when it emerges from that deep work, when the night is done and the current carries you back to the surface, you will be, in some fundamental way, a little more alive, a little more resourced, a little more capable of meeting whatever the new day brings. Because the deep has done its work. The dark has been generous, and the sleep that has taken you, as all good sleep takes those who allow it, has been complete. There is a particular quality of attention that the ocean teaches, simply by existing in the way that it exists. It is the quality of non-interference. The ocean does not interfere with its own processes. The thermohaline circulation does not have a sub-process that is monitoring whether the thermohaline circulation is working correctly and ready to intervene if it is not. The deep current simply flows. The surface gyre simply turns. The upwelling simply rises and the downwelling simply falls, and the whole enormous, intricate, beautiful system simply works, not because it is managed, but because it is not managed. Because it is left to follow its own nature, which is the nature of water responding to temperature and gravity and the shape of the basin it inhabits. This quality of non-interference is what the sleeping brain needs more than almost anything else. The brain knows how to sleep. The mechanisms for sleep are deeply and reliably encoded in its biology, evolved over hundreds of millions of years of animal life, refined through every generation of every creature that has ever needed to rest. The brain does not need to be managed into sleep. It does not need to be monitored or checked or helped along. It needs more than anything for the monitoring and checking and helping along to stop. For the interfering, anxious, watchful surface mind to step back and allow the deep systems to do what they know how to do. To allow the descent to happen without trying to guide it. To allow the darkness to be dark without rushing to illuminate it, to allow the current to carry without trying to steer. You are practicing this non-interference right now. Every moment that you listen without grasping, every moment that you allow a thought to arise and pass without following it or fighting it, every moment that you let the breath be slow and let the body be heavy and let the night be dark and quiet and entirely sufficient. You are practicing the ocean's particular wisdom, the wisdom of not interfering with your own deep processes, the wisdom of trusting the current. And the current, as it has always done with everything it has ever carried, is taking you exactly where you need to go. The surface of the ocean is where the action is, where the storms happen and the ships sail and the waves break and the sunlight plays in its endlessly shifting patterns on the water. But the surface is only a few meters thick. It is, in proportion to the total depth of the ocean, almost nothing. A skin, a membrane, the briefest imaginable interface between the atmosphere above and the true ocean below. And yet it is what we see. It is what we interact with. It is what most of us mean when we say the word ocean. The vast, dark, patient, ancient, life-sustaining majority of the ocean is invisible to us unless we deliberately go looking for it, unless we choose to descend. Your waking mind is the surface, vivid and active and full of the interaction between your inner world and the world outside. But the surface is only a small part of what you are. Beneath it, as beneath the ocean surface, there is something far vaster, far older, far less susceptible to the weather of the moment. And it is down there, in that vast and patient and ancient interior, that the most important things about you live and work and maintain themselves. The deep memory, the deep healing, the deep knowing that does not need to be stated or examined or defended because it is simply there, as the deep ocean is simply there, permanent and dark and entirely, reliably sufficient. Tonight, you have been given access to that depth. Not permanently, not as a destination to be held, but as an experience, a felt sense of what it is like to rest in something larger than yourself, to be carried by something older and more patient than anything the surface world contains, to find in the quiet and the dark and the slow movement of ancient water through the deepest places of the world, a mirror for the quiet and the dark and the slow movement of the sleeping mind through the deepest places of itself. This experience is yours now. It lives in the body as a felt memory. And the next time the surface feels too busy, too demanding, too much, the current will be here. The deep will be here, patient and cold and dark and entirely, perfectly, permanently reliable, ready to carry you down again. Let the last of the waking images soften now. Let them dissolve the way things dissolve at the very bottom of the water column, slowly and completely, becoming part of the medium they move through rather than objects separate from it. Let the last of the day's concerns follow the current into the dark. Not lost, not gone, simply distributed, carried to their resting place by the patient, ancient, completely sufficient mechanism of the deep. They will be there in the morning. Everything that matters will be there in the morning. But smaller, more manageable, more accurately proportioned to what they actually are, which is temporary, which is movable, which is already, in the grand patient time of the ocean, already passing. And you are here, in the deep, in the current, in the cold and the dark and the pressure that is not pressure but embrace, held from every direction, carried without effort, part of something so much larger than any single evening or any single concern or any single moment of a single human life, that the only appropriate response is the one your body is already giving. The slow breath, the heavy limbs, the eyes that have found their final rest behind their closed lids. The mind that is no longer quite making sense of anything in the way that waking minds make sense of things, but is instead doing something softer and stranger and more ancient. Something that does not have a name in any waking language, but that the sleeping body knows completely. The long, patient, dark, supported, utterly reliable descent into the deep. As we reach the end of our journey tonight, you might notice how wide and quietly connected this world has become. The blue mind and its gentle biological gift of rest. The thermohaline circulation and its thousand-year patience moving through the dark. The emotional regulation that the ocean models with effortless, unhurried elegance, carrying warmth from where it has accumulated to where it can be received. The deep wave narrative that gives the brain a rhythm slow enough to follow all the way into its most restorative renovation. And the final, simple, complete experience of being held by something ancient and enormous and entirely reliable. All of these are, in the end, different languages for the same single truth. That rest is available. That depth is accessible. That the nervous system, given the right conditions and the right images and the right quality of permission, knows exactly how to descend into the healing dark. The ocean has been showing us this for as long as human beings have had the capacity to be shown anything. We needed only, tonight, to follow the current down. Now that knowledge can soften. You do not need to remember every detail or name. Let the ideas settle like sediment in still water, drifting slowly to their resting place without any need for direction or management. Let the thermohaline current take whatever remains of the day's thinking and carry it slowly, gently, without urgency, toward wherever it needs to go. You do not need to track it. You do not need to know where it ends up. The ocean handles that. The ocean has always handled that. All you need to do is stay in the water. Stay in the dark. Stay in the gentle, enormous, perfectly calibrated embrace of something so much larger than any single evening that the evening itself, seen from within the deep, seems very small and very far away and very, very quiet. If you've enjoyed drifting through this gentle journey, you're always welcome to like, subscribe, or leave a quiet thought below. It helps this space reach other curious minds who might be winding down too. And if you happen to still be awake, there will be another video waiting on the screen, ready to carry you a little further into calm and curiosity. But for now, there is nothing else to do. Let your breathing slow. Let your shoulders sink. Allow the day to loosen its grip, knowing you can return to these ideas whenever you wish. Let insight heal you into sleep. Sleep well and good night.